I add a couple more slides to introduce this idea since we have like a visitor. So first, what is a medial axis? So it's a simple term, just a way to represent geometry. It's a different of the way of how we're used to, because it focuses more like from the interior of the actual representation, from the boundary. But it just the advantage that it has, it allows you to, in a kind of like simple way, understand what are the underlying parts that make up like a complex geometry. Also imposes some restriction on how the geometry, the topology of the geometry must be, because you usually work with a closed, perfectly closed polygons, sometimes with holes in them. So for building, which is our topic of interest, the reason we're applying this here is because every building is unique. They can be quite different, which makes it difficult to study them in a systematic way and to also try to predict them, for example, in an easy way. So the medial axis acts like an automated procedure to create a representation of the parts of the building and how they're connected to each other. This is one example, one paper that tries to replicate one well-known partition called the convex partition. And the nice part that also keeps all the information, the original information remains right there. So you can go back and forth in a clean way within the medial axis in the original boundary. So we were last semester actually work on implementing this like in a clean type of workflow, also in Grasshopper. And now this semester, since we managed to do that, we're thinking how we can apply this in floor plan generation or room type classification through graph neural networks. So this is one example. Other people have done this for like this type of approach. And this is like a summary of the process of how this works. Again, from last semester, we had input a collection of lines. We first compute the volume of segments from using a Python library. Then we do some post-processing to understand all the individual parts. And the key thing here is that we have first the graph based on the adjacency of the parts, and very different colors and different kind of part, which is different because it's created by different types of geometry. In this case, the pink ones are based on this concave corner. The yellow ones based on the two lines that are facing each other but not touching. The blue ones between a reflex corner and a line. And the green one based on two reflex corners that are like facing each other. So now for this semester, it's slightly different. So we have two type of approaches here. So actually, we're at the beginning of this and so let me go back at the.
Now we'll see how much work you've done.
Yes. So we were here. So this is the structure of this presentation. So we have two threads, like I said. Let me give the wrong number. One thread, which is we try to study and test and use the existing approaches for graph or for floor plan generation and graph-based generation and labeling. So it's the work of Roja and Jessica here. They do the main task, which includes some background and some the main paper that we're referencing. How to generate the graphs, how to label them, and how to an approximation. We're starting to look at how to measure the accuracy of a graph label, which represents, of course, a floor plan. And the other thread is that I was working more on is to how to then apply this medial axis type of work and to extract this like in a more complete pipeline of a larger data set, and then how to augment that the original kind of graph structure based on information of the medial axis and some also know theory from a space syntax we'll explain later. So then I will let you to Jessica.
Okay, yeah. So a little bit about the data set that we used. So we used the modified Swiss dwelling data set, which is just it's a modified version of the Swiss dwellings data set. And what it basically does is it basically processes this data set to be a little bit more ML friendly. So it'll split the data into like training data and then also test data. So yes, and it's one key thing to know about this is that it's kind of really, brings more complexity to the data set. So instead of like just focusing on like perfectly square rooms with perfectly square like apartment buildings, it'll be a little bit more different. So like you can see some of the floor plans here are a little bit angled and not all the rooms are equal. Okay, so some of the files that are available for this data set, we have 4 files. We have the struct, so it's just basically an outline of the floor plan. And then we have a graph with So each node here has a zoning, which is just a little bit more coarse. So instead of like having the specific rooms for each node, it'll have like, for example, zone 2 will be just a like it could either be like a corridor or a kitchen or a living room, right? So, and so there's like 4 zones of these. And then let's see, let's go back. And then there's also the specific like rooms. So here a graph has like each node has a specific room, right? So it's a little bit more specific. And then we also have the actual floor plan with the room. So for training, there's these 4 files that are available. For tests, we only have the first 2. And so yes, you can talk about a little bit more about that.
And so to start with this, we also wanted to test it out how the paper converts the paper for the modified Swiss data set converts the graphs into actual floor plan images. And so for this, we saw that they used a UNet model, which essentially just predicts the pixel type of every pixel in the image. And it combines this with the GCN, which is a graph convolutional network, which learns the embedding of the zoning graph. So it learns all of the features of the input zoning graph. And then the output of this graph convolutional network is fed into the UNet model, and it takes this embedding into account when segmenting the image into different rooms. And so yeah, we tried training this model using the PACE cluster, and it took around 4 hours using NVIDIA's L40S GPU. And we use 100 epochs for training. And so you can see here's sort of the training loss versus epoch. And so on the left is the input model, or the input image. In the middle is the output of our model. And on the right is the ground truth. As you can see, the results still have a lot of room to work on. And that's sort of like what we want to work on for next semester.
Okay. I guess, yeah, I can talk about this. Okay. So there's some generation gaps. So there's been some other literature that has worked on generating floor plans. And some of the gaps include they just use like simpler data sets, so they don't use MSD. And then sometimes the graphs, sometimes the rooms that are generated don't make sense. So like maybe there's like a bathroom in the middle of a kitchen, like that doesn't really make sense. And then there's also more training the models. Oh yeah. Also like sometimes something that we could improve on is basically like taking the different shapes, irregular shapes into account to lead to a better prediction. So yes, generation approach. Okay, yeah. You want to talk about
Sure, I can briefly talk about this. So
okay.
we took like a slightly different approach to we have very little time. We have a lot of slides there. So quickly,
You
instead
can skip
of
some things that are not that important.
yes, instead of just generating even a structure and try to say the partition of the structure, we're instead going to generate the graph itself, and then going to think of in the future how to convert the graph into an actual into the geometry of the floor. Okay, let's keep going a bit faster.
Okay. Yeah, so one of the models we used is called graph RNN. So what that basically does is you give it some type of graphs to train, right? So in this case, like you have like a graph that kind of has 2 clusters. And what graph RNN will do is it'll output similar graphs like that. So we use this to train on the MSD data set. And it's actually pretty fast. Like I can run it on my laptop, which is kind of insane. And so we use 2,000 graphs. And so, for example, these are the training graphs that we inputted, so that you can kind of see that it kind of has a spine, and then it has like some of the leaves. And so these are our outputs. So it looks pretty similar structurally. And so now the next step is to like, these are just graphs like that just has structure. They don't really have any features. So you can't really tell which node is a room. So the next step here is to try to give each of these nodes some label, right? And so for that, we're using GraphStage. And so what GraphStage basically does is it takes all the neighbors and it takes like the features of the neighbors, and then it just kind of it learns some function to create a node embedding for the target node. So in this case, it's A. And you can do this multiple times, right? So this is just once. And then this is like you can take the neighbors of the neighbors, right? And then this will like create better embeddings. So we did this and we ran it, and this is our result. It looks pretty good. It kind of makes sense. Like you see the corridors are in the inside and then bedrooms outside. Makes sense. Yes.
Oh, yeah. And so to actually evaluate these graphs, since suppose a graph of 28 rooms, they could each have different arrangements, but they could still be valid graphs. So for what we did to sort of evaluate this, and we'll look more into this next semester, is we went through all possible pairs of rooms, right? So between such as a kitchen and a bedroom, or a living room and a bedroom, we counted all possible pairs of rooms within the data set. So what we did is we simply just iterated through every edge. We looked at which two nodes that they connect, and we updated the frequency for that pair node. And what we can do is we can group this count of label adjacencies by building, and we can divide each of these counts by the respective total number of connections in that building. And so what this gives us is how likely that label is to happen in that particular building. And we can work more with this to evaluate the graphs that our pipeline sort of generates. And so here's just a quick overview of the total counts between each different type of room.
Okay, I can maybe take 2 more minutes to quickly go through the second thread here.
1 minute, granted.
1 minute, okay, I'll take it. So extraction and augmentation of the floor plan graphs. So the 4 steps that we'll be using. Okay, just get into them. So first one is to read the Swiss dwelling data set. So we created this simple graph applying to quickly go through all the raw geometry, which is quite it's not very bad, but it needs some pre-processing, like see some issues there and how the corners are handled. So we rely on the Clipper 2 library to do some fast geometrical union and difference operations. Then through the same type of library, we can identify what's the precise topology that we care about. In this case, we want this inner boundary, and we want the halls of the building is required. So at the end, we can get this like, this is an example of the first, I believe, 3 buildings, and we have around 4 subs or something like that in the data set. So because we can actually color them properly means that it's working fine, right? There was some filtering process involved. This is the screenshot of the script that does all these things. And at the end, we can just compute with that clean geometry. We can compute the Medial axis transformation the way it's mentioned before. So one more part of this, in addition to the, let's say, augmentation of the Medial axis itself, which gives you a lot more information about the underlying geometry of the plan. A second step that we apply here, which is the most latest work, so we want to now orient this graph. And this comes from, apart from some early space syntax theory, apart from what we learned from the graph stage approaches. So we want to not only define to create a directed graph, and the direction comes from this idea of the underlying social logic, how the building is built, or how the nodes or the rooms are placed. It has some directionality embedded. For example, a bedroom would tend to lead into a bathroom, and will be very strange to the way to be the case. A living room will tend to lead a kitchen, and the entrance will always lead to every single node in the building. So we take this approach, we apply it to the whole building. We can create a rooted directed acyclic graph, and that gives you a way more constrained representation of the graph that has a lot more information embedded in it. So to do that, we went through some approaches. The best we found, again, we just started working with this. It's called it's a C3 library from Microsoft. It's called Satisfiability Model Theory Solver. Has many applications like problem verification, global validation, in between the network verification. The way it works, it represents each direction of each edge as a bool, and each rank of the vertex as an integer. And with that kind of setup, then we can define a set of orientation rules, and then we can find all the possible valid orientations that comply with those rules that we predefine. So we can let the user, first one rule is, of course, there's no cycle, this is a directed acyclic graph. It needs to be reachable from one node, which the user will define, and you can define like node-to-node directions between the Medial axis to actually establish what are the ways to orient the graph. So we start with the building floor plan, we compute the Medial axis, we get the graph, we define an entrance node, so everything we directed from here. We have, for example, like like a source level and a target level. So if we need at least one direction, one reachability relationship between these two graphs, sorry, nodes, and then we can actually complete the orientation that complies with those rules. And of course, it will give you, if we give you one, it will give you none, it will give you many. In this case, I believe there were like around 200, because this is the first 40. It's very, very quickly can actually produce these results like in the order of seconds. And this also implemented in the case we're applying here is the Medial computation. This is the actual orientation process, which it has as an input a quality which you can define the entrance point, where the position of these levels, where the target and the source, and so you can orient the graph in whatever way you want. So your work, we have to now have all this part of it to put them all together, and we have to first apply this like a pipeline into the whole data set, so we can store all the graphs of the Medial axis. We have to then train, use the work by Jessica to train these graphs, or the Medial axis based graphs, and see if we can actually make better improvements of floor plans with these new graphs compared to the baseline that we have. We have to also finish the accuracy type of assessment is not completed. And yeah, that's pretty.
Okay.